The word struck, a physical blow disguised as an utterance, freezing the festive tableau around me. Trash. The single syllable hung in the air, heavy and sharp, slicing through the cheerful din of Christmas carols and clinking cutlery. My mother's gaze, usually softened by the holiday glow, was like flint, igniting the spark of old resentments that had simmered for decades. 18 faces, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, turned, some in outright shock, others with a carefully constructed neutrality that bespoke a deep familiarity with such pronouncements. Across the laden table, Brandon, my younger brother, offered a faint, almost imperceptible smirk, a ghost of triumph that echoed in the deepest chambers of my memory. She expected me to laugh. That was the unwritten rule, the unspoken demand that had governed my entire life in this family. Take the hit. Smile through the sting. Preserve the fragile peace. But something was irrevocably different this time. The weight of her judgment, the casual cruelty of her dismissal, no longer registered as a familiar ache, but as a sudden, sharp snap within me. It wasn't anger, not exactly, and it wasn't the searing shame I had grown accustomed to. It was a cold clarity, like glass shattering to reveal a perfectly ordered, desolate landscape underneath. For the first time in 31 years, the reflex to protect their comfort vanished, replaced by an urgent, undeniable need to protect my own. I set my fork down with a quiet clink that seemed to resonate in the sudden, thick silence. The polished silver felt cool against my fingers, a tangible anchor in the rising tide of unreality. Without a word, without a glance back at the shocked faces or the triumphant smirk, I pushed my chair away from the table. It scraped faintly on the hardwood floor, a sound that in any other moment would have brought a sharp reprimand, but now merely underscored the unnatural stillness. I walked away from the warmth, the festive lights, the carefully arranged feast, and climbed the familiar stairs to the guest room where my suitcase lay half unpacked. The murmurs started below me, a low, confused hum that gradually swelled. My mother's voice cut through the rising tide of sound, sharper now, laced with a familiar indignation. "Nathan? Where are you going?" She knew. I knew she knew. That defensive edge in her tone, the slight tremor beneath the feigned authority, was her tell. She had crossed a line, and even if she'd never admit it, a part of her recognized the irreversible shift. Inside the guest room, the air was cooler, quieter. I opened my suitcase and began to pack. Each item, a folded shirt, a toothbrush, the worn paperback I'd brought for the flight, the tangle of chargers, was placed with methodical precision. There was no hurriedness, no dramatic flinging of clothes, just the steady, deliberate movements of a man gathering his belongings. The zipper sang a quiet, decisive song as I closed the bag, sealing away not just my possessions, but a lifetime of unspoken expectations and unreciprocated effort. When I descended the stairs again, the house was a different landscape. Half the guests had risen, forming small, anxious knots of conversation. My father, his face a confused storm of embarrassment and frustration, intercepted me in the hallway. "You're overreacting, Nathan," he said, his voice low, strained. "Your mother didn't mean it like that. You're being dramatic, ruining Christmas for everyone." His words were a well-worn script, one he'd played countless times before, always directing the blame onto me, always minimizing her cruelty. I looked at him, truly looked at him, this man who had stood by for 3 decades, a silent observer as his wife systematically dismantled my self-worth. This man who had poured resources into my brother's endless failures while I clawed my way through every obstacle. This man who, even now, prioritized the comfort of the gathering over the dignity of his son. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just walked past him, a quiet current of resolve guiding me towards the front door. My mother stood there, a sentinel guarding the threshold. Her arms were crossed, her posture rigid, a strange alchemy of indignation and, perhaps, a flicker of fear in her eyes. "If you walk out that door, Nathan, you're making a choice," she declared, her voice taut. "You're showing everyone exactly who you really are. Goodbye." It was a threat, a final gamble designed to make me crumble, to revert to the compliant son who always sought her elusive approval. I paused, my hand on the cold brass doorknob. I met her gaze, then shifted to Brendan, who stood behind her, his lips still curved in that self-satisfied smirk. My father, further back, was already shaking his head, already condemning me as the problem. The faces of my extended family, gathered in the living room, watched the unfolding drama like a televised spectacle. I said nothing. Some things, I realized with a profound certainty, didn't need words. They demanded action. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, a blessed relief. The world beyond the threshold of that house was still and dark, the Christmas decorations of neighboring homes twinkling silently. I found my rental car, the anonymous vehicle, a perfect metaphor for the anonymity I had always felt within my own family. The engine turned over with a reassuring rumble. By 11 p.m. on Christmas night, I was 30,000 feet in the air, heading back to Arizona, the only home I had truly built for myself. My phone buzzed relentlessly with a cacophony of messages, my mother's fury morphing into desperate guilt trips, my father's pleas to stop being childish, Brendan's singular, dismissive text, nice tantrum, bro. I read each one, a detached observer witnessing the frantic flailings of people unable to grasp the magnitude of what had just occurred. Then, I turned my phone off. The silence was absolute, vast, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly, utterly free. The quiet hum of the plane engines had been a balm, a rhythmic pulse accompanying my journey not just through miles, but through years. In the vast darkness beyond the window, a different kind of silence settled, one that invited a deep dive into the reservoir of my past. To understand why those words, trash, disappointment, were the ultimate rupture, one had to understand the relentless, systemic favoritism that had defined my existence. My name is Nathan, 31 years old, the eldest of two sons. My brother, Brendan, is 3 years younger, and from the moment he drew his first breath, he became the sun around which my parents' universe revolved. This wasn't the common, petty squabble of siblings over who received a bigger slice of cake. This was a sustained, decades-long dynamic of overt partiality that, when viewed retrospectively, took on the stark, undeniable contours of an emotional scar. Our childhood home in Ohio was less a shared space and more two parallel realities. Brendan inhabited a world where his very existence was cause for celebration. Every small accomplishment was met with effusive praise, every misstep cushioned by a protective tenderness that bordered on adoration. He was the fragile masterpiece, deserving of endless coddling and unwavering support. My reality was a stark contrast, a barren landscape where nothing I did was ever quite enough. Achievements were minimized, efforts overlooked. I was the utility player, the background character whose primary function seemed to be to subtly elevate Brendan's shine. I remember saving for my first car at 16. 18 months I toiled at the local grocery store, stocking shelves, enduring the entitled whims of customers, meticulously setting aside every dollar. $3,000, a monumental sum forged from blistered hands and weary feet. My parents contributed nothing. It builds character, Nathan, my mother had declared, a platitude that now tasted like ash. Character building. A phrase reserved exclusively for me. Then, Brendan turned 16. A brand new Mustang, pristine and gleaming, appeared in our driveway. Purchased outright. No questions, no lectures on the virtues of hard work. When I, young and raw with the sting of injustice, dared to point out the glaring disparity, my mother uttered words that still echoed with a chilling clarity. Brendan is different. Brendan needs more support. Brendan is special. Special. The word became a haunting refrain throughout my formative years. Every milestone I achieved, a good grade, a successful project, a personal best, was met with an indifferent nod, deemed merely expected. But when Brendan managed anything, even the most mediocre feat, it was hailed as a miracle, a testament to his unique brilliance. I graduated high school with a 3.9 GPA, juggling my studies with a 25-hour work week. Brendan, despite private tutoring funded by our parents, barely scraped by with a 2.1. Yet, it was Brendan who received the lavish graduation party, catered and packed with 50 guests, while my own quiet celebration was, predictably, an afterthought. College followed a similar trajectory. I navigated scholarships, work-study programs, and nearly full-time employment, driven by a desperate hunger for stability, for something concrete and earned. I chose finance, drawn to the predictable logic of numbers in a world that often felt chaotically unfair. For years later, I emerged with honors, burdened by debt but fortified by self-reliance. Brandon, after 3 desultory semesters, declared college wasn't for him. My parents, ever eager to smooth his path, paid off his $28,000 in student loans. He needs a fresh start, they'd reasoned, their voices devoid of the character-building sermons reserved for me. Meanwhile, my own student loan statements arrived, a stark reminder of the different standards. When I cautiously inquired if they might assist with even a fraction of my debt, given their generosity towards Brandon, my mother actually laughed. A light, dismissive sound. "You're perfectly capable, Nathan. Brandon needs more help, life is harder for him." Harder, I thought, for the son who had never held a steady job, never wrestled with academic struggles without paid assistance, never worried about the cost of a textbook. The double standard was so naked, so unashamedly blatant, it would have been darkly comedic if it hadn't been the very fabric of my life. I recalled a Thanksgiving during my junior year. I'd returned home, bone-weary from extra shifts to cover rent, stressed by looming finals. I mentioned my workload, a casual remark intended as a catch-up, and my mother's expression soured. "You should focus more on family, Nathan, and less on money," she'd admonished, as if financial stability were a selfish pursuit. This was the same woman who, just days before, had written Brandon a $2,000 check for a road trip with his friends. The same woman who never once inquired about my own financial struggles, never offered a word of support. After graduation, the lure of opportunity led me away from Ohio, to an entry-level analyst position at an investment firm in Arizona. It wasn't glamorous, certainly not the kind of career path my parents understood or approved of. They preferred Brandon's proximity, his amiable presence in their orbit. For years, I simply ground. 12-hour days melted into 12-hour nights, weekends bled into weekdays. I climbed the corporate ladder with grim determination, each rung a testament to effort, for no one was there to hand me anything. During this same period, Brandon drifted. Retail jobs, restaurant gigs, a brief, unremarkable stint as a personal trainer that lasted less than a season. And through it all, my parents subsidized him, rent. Payments, grocery allowances, co-signing his apartment lease when his credit was, predictably, a wasteland. They even replaced his Mustang when it finally gave out, a casualty of neglect. Then, things began to shift. By 29, I was a senior portfolio manager, responsible for accounts worth millions. My income eclipsed my parents' combined earnings. And with this success, the family dynamic, already strained, warped further. My mother's veiled criticisms became more frequent during my visits. "Do you really need such a nice apartment, Nathan? Is your job truly stable? Perhaps you're working too hard. Brandon has found peace and simplicity." Peace and simplicity. Her euphemism for her nearly 30-year-old son living off their retirement, delivering food intermittently, and spending 16 hours a day immersed in video games. Brandon, for his part, became more overtly resentful. The air around him bristled with it whenever I returned. He'd fall silent when I spoke of work, his eyes would roll skyward when Arizona was mentioned. He'd make snide remarks about some people just getting lucky, a biting irony coming from the mouth of a man who had everything handed to him. For years, I attempted to maintain the fragile illusion of peace. I sent money home when my parents voiced financial complaints. I bought Brandon birthday gifts he never acknowledged. I flew home for every major holiday, sacrificing precious vacation days that could have been spent in genuine relaxation. I performed the role of the good son, the dutiful brother. But it was never enough. In their eyes, I remained the difficult one, the cold one who chose ambition over family, the one who needed to be brought down a peg. Which brings us back to that Christmas. The season that cleaved my life into a before and an after. My company had just closed a monumental deal, the largest acquisition in our firm's history, and I had led the charge. My bonus alone exceeded my father's annual salary by a significant margin. I harbored no desire to brag, that was never my way. But I was proud. A quiet, deep-seated pride. For the first time, I truly felt I had made it, that the years of relentless grind had yielded something substantial. I flew home with a flicker of fragile hope, a foolish optimism that perhaps, just perhaps, this year would be different. That they would finally see me, acknowledge the man their eldest son had become. The house, as always, was a festive wonderland, adorned like a catalogue spread. My mother, exhausted from 3 days of relentless cooking, had created a magnificent spread for the 18 extended family members crammed into their modest home. Brendan held court in the living room, charming his new girlfriend, Ashley, a dental hygienist who seemed oblivious to the family's intricate, toxic ecosystem. He was regaling them with tales of his new business opportunity, a thinly veiled MLM scheme he'd just joined. My parents, their faces aglow with pride, nodded along as if he'd just announced a cure for cancer. My own arrival was met with lukewarm acknowledgement, a few perfunctory hugs, some quick questions about my flight, before the spotlight inevitably swung back to Brendan's latest, improbable venture. Within 10 minutes, I found myself adrift by the appetizer table, a familiar ghost in my own family's narrative. Dinner commenced around 6. The table, extended to its absolute limit, groaned under the weight of turkey, ham, and a panoply of sides and desserts. I found myself wedged between my Aunt Carol and a distant cousin's husband, a man whose name I vaguely recalled. It felt intentional, this peripheral placement. Brendan, naturally, was enthroned at the center, flanked by my parents, his new girlfriend Ashley beside him, her expression a mix of admiration and innocence. The conversation flowed, a predictable river of updates on children, complaints about the weather, and the perennial grievances of politics and gas prices. Brendan dominated, weaving tales of his imminent millions, his parents beaming with an uncritical pride. My father, ever his loudest cheerleader, interjected with enthusiastic affirmations of Brendan's calling. No one asked me much. I had long ago learned to make myself small, to become an invisible presence, an afterthought in a room full of people who shared my blood but not my understanding. Then, my grandmother, bless her earnest heart, broke the spell. And Nathan, she chimed, her voice sweet and genuine, how is your work going, dear? It was a simple, innocent question. I offered a modest, honest response, speaking of a successful year, of gratitude for opportunities. No bravado, no showmanship. Just an answer for a woman who, unlike the rest, seemed genuinely interested. That's when my mother interjected. A brittle, performative laugh, devoid of humor, escaped her lips. The sound seemed to suck the very oxygen from the room. And then, the words. It's funny, isn't it, she began, her gaze fixed on me, sharp and unwavering, how the family trash ended up pretending to be successful. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. He must have fooled a lot of people to get where he is, she continued, her voice rising slightly, because it certainly wasn't talent or hard work. Brendan, he's the one with real potential. Nathan just got lucky, because he was willing to abandon his family for money. 18 people. 18 witnesses to my public execution. My grandmother's face crumpled with mortification. My cousins shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting away. My father stared at his plate as if its patterned rim held the secrets of the universe. And Brendan's smirk deepened, a silent declaration of victory. It was a sneer that proclaimed, no matter what I achieved, no matter how high I climbed, I would forever remain beneath him in our mother's estimation. For a fleeting, agonizing moment, the familiar urge clawed at me, to smooth things over, to laugh it off, to offer a self-deprecating joke to diffuse the unbearable tension, to allow everyone to pretend it hadn't happened. This had been my coping mechanism, my lifelong strategy. Take the hit. Protect their comfort. Sacrifice my dignity. But this time, something was profoundly different. Perhaps it was the cumulative weight of 31 years of casual cruelty. Perhaps it was the knowledge of the significant, hard-won accomplishment I'd just achieved, and the crushing realization that even that was not enough. Or perhaps it was simply Brandon's smirk, seen one too many times. Whatever the catalyst, the emotional switch within me flipped, and a profound coldness settled. Not anger, not sadness, but a stark, liberating detachment. I saw everything with pristine clarity. The pattern. The futility. The inherent, unchangeable dynamic. I said nothing. I simply stood, walked upstairs, and packed. The weeks that followed Christmas were a strange landscape of quiet recovery and deliberate construction. I returned to Arizona, to the life I had meticulously built. Work became a sanctuary, absorbing my focus. I pushed myself harder at the gym, the physical exertion a cleansing ritual. I reconnected with friends I had, perhaps unknowingly, neglected, rediscovering the easy camaraderie of relationships untainted by expectation or resentment. I engaged in all the prescriptive activities one is told to undertake when navigating profound personal upheaval. But one thing I did not do, not once, was reach out to my family. My mother's messages charted an interesting emotional arc during those initial weeks. The initial fury, punctuated by accusations of selfishness, gave way to increasingly desperate guilt trips. These, in turn, morphed into passive-aggressive missives about how I was destroying the family. A period of unsettling silence followed, stretching for almost a week, before tentative olive branches appeared, messages feigning concern for my well-being, yet imbued with the unspoken demand for an apology from me, for my overreaction. My father's outreach was sparse, 2 texts in total. The first, urging me to call my really upset mother. The second, a warning that he hoped I knew what I was doing by cutting off my family. Both carried the unmistakable subtext, I was the problem. My reaction to public humiliation was somehow more egregious than the humiliation itself. Brandon, after his initial, dismissive text, remained silent, a predictable absence. Why would he bother? His position in the family hierarchy remained unchallenged, perhaps even reinforced by my self-exile. I responded to none of them. Not out of spite, not as a calculated game. I simply had nothing to say. What was there to discuss? My mother had branded me trash before an audience of 18 and expected me to laugh. My father had minimized her cruelty and condemned my response. My brother had savored his familiar victory. These weren't people who had misunderstood me. They were people who understood me perfectly well and had consistently chosen to diminish me. The silence from my end stretched into January, then February. By March, 3 months had passed without contact, an unprecedented chasm. And for the first time in memory, I felt an unfamiliar, profound peace. I spent those months meticulously rediscovering myself, unburdening myself from the suffocating weight of my family's shadow. It turned out, I actually quite liked the person I was when I wasn't constantly being measured against Brandon, or made to feel like a perpetual outsider. I resurrected long-abandoned hobbies, devoured books for pleasure, embraced hiking among Arizona's breathtaking trails, finally possessing the mental bandwidth to enjoy such simple pleasures. I even began cooking more, a passion I'd always deferred. When every ounce of my energy wasn't consumed by work and the relentless emotional labor of managing family dysfunction, the transformation was remarkable. I slept deeper. Laughter came more easily. The constant knot of anxiety in my stomach, a familiar companion for so long I'd forgotten its absence, finally began to unravel. I recognized, with a chilling clarity, how much of my life had been spent in a constant state of emotional siege, always bracing for the next criticism, the next comparison, the next stinging reminder that I would never measure up. Around February, the extended family began to trickle through. My grandmother called, her voice trembling with concern, and I answered. She had always been an exception, a small bastion of unwavering affection. She told me she was proud of me, that she understood why I'd left, and that she had given my mother an earful after I walked out. Apparently, opinions within the extended clan were divided. Half believed my mother had overstepped, the other half felt I should just get over it. Family dynamics, indeed, were a curious beast. Aunt Carol, the cousin's wife I'd sat next to, sent a long, heartfelt email, apologizing for her stunned silence at the dinner. She confessed she had always observed the preferential treatment, regretted never speaking up. It meant something, to know that some had seen, some had understood. But the critical figures, my mother, my father, Brandon, remained in their own profound silence. Not a silence of reflection or remorse, but a silence of expectation, waiting for me to blink first, to return to the fold, as I always had. Work, freed from the emotional drain, not only continued but thrived. I was promoted again in April, to vice president of our regional division. 31 years old, leading a team of 40, managing a portfolio worth hundreds of millions. In May, I bought a house, not extravagant, but a beautiful 3-bedroom with a pool, nestled in a community where neighbors greeted each other. I adopted Duke, a 2-year-old German Shepherd mix from the shelter, who immediately became my steadfast companion. And then, Rebecca. I met her through a mutual friend. An architect, she possessed a refreshingly low tolerance for family drama, having years ago detached herself from her own toxic parents. We understood each other in ways that felt rare and profound. Life, for the first time, was not just good in the performative way I used to present to my family, but genuinely, authentically good. Then came June. The news reached me through my grandmother, relayed through the intricate, whispering grapevine of the family. Brandon's MLM had, predictably, imploded. The business opportunity was, as many had suspected, a predatory scheme that dissolved under the scrutiny of federal regulators. Brandon, not only losing his substantial investment, had also convinced several family friends to join, leading to the predictable cascade of legal threats. But the financial fallout was even more severe. He had been living on the fantasy of future earnings, maxing out credit cards, neglecting rent, leveraging anything he could. The collapse left him with nothing. Less than nothing. $60,000 in debt, no real job prospects, and a tarnished reputation in our hometown as the guy who'd drawn people into a pyramid scheme. My parents, his lifelong benefactors, now faced a stark choice. Bail him out again, at the risk of completely decimating their own retirement savings, or, for the first time in his life, allow Brandon to face the consequences of his own choices. They chose to bail him out, of course, but the hole was too deep. They paid off the most threatening creditors, covered his rent for a few months, and then hit a wall. My father, against all his retirement plans, took a part-time job at a hardware store. My mother, at her age, began doing bookkeeping work from home. They were grinding, simply to keep Brandon afloat. Brandon, the golden child, nearly 30, retreated to his childhood bedroom, his parents now working to subsidize his failures. I heard all of this secondhand, through my grandmother, through Aunt Carol, the familial telegraph keeping me informed despite my 6 months of silence. I won't pretend I felt no satisfaction. I am human. After 3 decades of watching him fail upwards while I clawed for every inch, there was a certain, undeniable poetic justice in seeing reality finally catch up. But I felt no need to gloat, no urge to utter an "I told you so." I didn't insert myself into their crisis. I simply continued living my life, nurturing my career, building a beautiful existence with Rebecca and Duke, cherishing the hard-won peace. Then the messages began. My mother's came first. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of Christmas. A request. She needed financial assistance, just temporarily, just until they got back on their feet. Family helps family, she wrote, adding that while things had been difficult, surely I wouldn't abandon them when they needed me most. The audacity was breathtaking. The woman who had branded me trash 6 months prior, who had offered no shred of remorse, now expected me to subsidize the failures of her golden child. I didn't respond. A week later, my father's message arrived, echoing the same request, albeit couched in slightly different language. He spoke of their unexpected difficulties, how family was supposed to stick together through thick and thin. He conspicuously mentioned my success several times, emphasizing how proud they were of my accomplishments. Funny how that pride only manifested when they required something. I didn't respond. Brendan's message was the most surprising. Shorter, less pleading, more entitled. He acknowledged our differences but insisted I was still his brother. He was going through a rough patch, he wrote, and could use some support, promising to pay me back once he was back on his feet. He even added, with a sickening flourish, that I had always been the smart one and he was just trying to learn from my success. I reread it 3 times, searching for any hint of genuine remorse, any acknowledgement of the years of mistreatment, any understanding of why I had walked away. There was nothing. Just the golden child, expecting the universe, this time through the brother he had spent 30 years looking down upon, to provide. I didn't respond. By August, my silence had driven them to desperation. My grandmother confirmed it, and the messages themselves had escalated from requests to demands, then to outright guilt trips. My mother's next message called me selfish, expressed disbelief that she had raised someone so heartless, and accused me of abandoning my family in their time of need when they had always been there for me. That last line almost elicited a laugh. Always been there for me, in what alternate reality? My father tried a different tack, a lengthy missive about his disappointment in the man I had become, how success had changed me, how he remembered the little boy who cared about family above everything else. He hoped I would find my way back. Brendan's messages grew increasingly aggressive, branding me a sellout, claiming I thought I was better than everyone, and accusing me of seeking revenge for perceived jealousy. The projection was almost too perfect, too textbook. Through it all, I maintained my silence. Not as a game, not to manipulate, but because I had genuinely moved on. Their chaos was no longer my responsibility. Their financial woes were not my concern. Their emotional needs were not mine to manage. Then, she arrived. I came home from work one Tuesday evening to find my mother sitting on my front porch, looking inexplicably older, more tired, more etched with worry than I remembered. Duke, sensing a stranger, was going berserk inside. I took a moment to compose myself before approaching. It had been nearly 8 months since Christmas. 8 months of absolute silence. And now, she was here, uninvited, on my doorstep. She rose as I neared, tears already welling in her eyes, words spilling out in a frantic, disjointed torrent. Apologies. Excuses. Justifications. I didn't mean what I said, just stressed, took it out on you. I've always loved you, Nathan, I let her talk. I stood on my own walkway, keys in hand, and listened as she poured out her performance. She spoke of the hardships since I left, the gaping hole my absence had created, the sleepless nights spent wondering where she'd gone wrong. She swore she hadn't realized the true weight of her words until I walked out that door. It was a masterful act, honestly. Had I not lived 31 years under her particular brand of manipulation, I might have believed it. But I knew my mother. I knew tears from her usually heralded a request. When she finally faltered, her voice hoarse, I asked one simple question, my voice calm, steady. Why are you really here, Mom? The tears ceased almost instantly. Her expression hardened, then shifted, revealing the raw truth. They needed money. Brendan's situation had spiraled. Legal issues, potential lawsuits from his disgruntled recruits. Financial ruin was imminent, and my help was their last, desperate hope. I nodded slowly. I understand, I said, my voice even. And I appreciate you coming all this way. Then, I told her no. Not with anger, not with vindictive satisfaction, but with a quiet, unshakable certainty. I would not bail out Brendan. I would not fund a lifestyle they could not afford. I offered to recommend financial professionals who could help them restructure their debts, but I would not write a check to make their problems disappear. She tried. She argued, she pleaded, she guilt-tripped. She invoked every card in her well-worn deck, the 9 months she carried me, the sacrifices of my youth, the sacred bond of family. What did family mean, I countered, my voice still measured, when you called me trash in front of everyone? What did it mean when you spent 30 years favoring Brendan while I earned everything on my own? What did it mean when you never acknowledged my accomplishments unless you needed something from me? She had no answers, only more tears, more deflections, more attempts to make me feel responsible for her unhappiness. I offered to pay for a night at a local hotel if she needed rest. But I made it clear she wasn't staying in my home, and no amount of uninvited appearances would change my decision. She left without taking me up on the offer. As her rental car disappeared down my street, I felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, no second-guessing. Just the calm certainty of a boundary finally held. The months following my mother's visit solidified the new landscape of my life. The family divide became permanent. Those who understood and supported my decision remained in my orbit. Those who judged me as cruel gradually faded. Both outcomes, I found, were perfectly acceptable. My parents continued to struggle. They sold their house, downsizing to a smaller apartment. My father's part-time job became full-time. My mother's bookkeeping expanded. For the first time, they faced the direct, undeniable consequences of their choices. Brendan drifted, couch-surfing, holding down brief, forgettable jobs. Ashley, his dental hygienist girlfriend, had dumped him sometime around July, once the true extent of his financial disaster became undeniable. Last I heard, he was working at a warehouse, finally, for perhaps the first time, earning his own way. Did I feel bad for them? In some abstract, biological sense, perhaps. They were, after all, my family. I didn't wish them genuine suffering, but I was no longer willing to sacrifice my own well-being to rescue them from the consequences of their own making. Rebecca and I got engaged in November. Duke, in a custom-made tuxedo, served as ring bearer at our engagement party, which was exactly as adorable as it sounds. We bought a bigger house together, started talking about children, building a life that felt genuinely fulfilling in ways I had never imagined possible. The engagement party itself was a revelation, just 30 people who genuinely cared for us. Friends from work, Rebecca's family who embraced me like their own son, a few of my cousins who had reached out after that Christmas. No drama, no hidden agendas, no one trying to diminish another. Just authentic celebration. Rebecca's parents, who flew in from Oregon, were particularly supportive. Her father pulled me aside, telling me he was glad his daughter had found someone who understood the importance of boundaries. Rebecca had shared my story, and instead of judgment, I found respect. It was the first glimpse into what truly supportive in-laws felt like, a stark, illuminating contrast to my own upbringing. We spent that winter planning not just a wedding, but a future. Where we would live, how many children we might raise, the kind of life we wanted to cultivate. These conversations flowed easily with Rebecca, unburdened by the constant need to appease, to perform for an audience that would never be satisfied. We were building something new, something intrinsically ours, free from the crushing weight of generational dysfunction. My grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep the following February, at 83. I flew back to Ohio for the funeral, the first time I had seen my parents and Brendan in over a year. The funeral was, as expected, awkward. My mother attempted a hug, a strained embrace that I accepted briefly before stepping back. My father nodded from across the room. Brendan meticulously avoided my gaze. We were strangers, bound by a shared genetic code, and the silent chasm between us was palpable to everyone present. After the service, my mother pulled me aside. She looked genuinely older, more tired, more defeated. She said she had been thinking about everything. She admitted she understood why I had pulled away. She wished things had been different. It wasn't a full apology, not yet, but it was closer than anything she had offered before. I appreciate that, Mom, I told her, my voice softer than I'd intended. I hope you, Dad, and Brendan are doing okay. I looked at her, searching for something, anything. I don't hate you. Or Dad. Or Brendan. I just couldn't be part of a family that didn't respect me. This time, her tears were real, devoid of the manipulative edge from her visit to Arizona. She asked if there was any way we could start over, to rebuild what had been broken. I thought about it, truly considered it. This wasn't a snap decision, it was a moment I had replayed 1,000 times since walking out that Christmas night. Rebuilding, Mom, I said, would require acknowledgement. Real acknowledgement of the favoritism. Real acknowledgement of the damage it caused. Real acknowledgement that I had been treated as less my entire life. Not just words designed to get me to write a check. Actual understanding of the harm that was done. I told her that if she and Dad were ever willing to do the hard work of genuinely rebuilding, I would be open to it. But that work had to come from them. I wouldn't coach them through it, accept half measures, or pretend everything was fine for the sake of harmony. She nodded, said she understood, and promised to talk to my dad. That was 14 months ago. Last month, a letter arrived. An actual handwritten letter from my mom, just like the ones she used to send when I was in college, before everything deteriorated. It was 6 pages long. She detailed specific memories from my childhood, instances I had long buried, the forgotten 15th birthday because Brandon had a soccer tournament, the missed college graduation because Brandon had a cold, the way they always introduced Brandon first at family events, always talked about him more, always made me feel invisible. She acknowledged it all, every instance I'd mentioned at the funeral, and a dozen more I had long forgotten. My dad had added a page at the end, shorter, more practical, but he admitted he had failed me by never standing up when he should have. There was no request for money, no ask for anything. Just 2 people, finally, owning 30 years of mistakes. I called my mom the next day. It was the first time I had spoken to her in nearly 2 years. We talked for almost 3 hours. She cried. I didn't. I told her exactly what those years felt like, the emotional landscape I had navigated. She listened, without making a single excuse. That was new. 2 weeks later, they flew out to Arizona. I picked them up at the airport. My mom hugged me, a long, tight embrace that lasted a full minute. My dad shook my hand, then pulled me into a hug too, the first time he'd done so since I was perhaps 12 years old. They stayed for 5 days. They met Rebecca properly, and immediately fell in love with Duke. My dad spent an entire afternoon in the backyard, throwing a tennis ball until Duke was gloriously exhausted. My mom helped Rebecca pick out paint colors for the nursery. It was, for the first time, normal family stuff. The kind of normalcy I had never thought possible with them. On their last night, we sat on the back patio after dinner. My dad cleared his throat, a familiar gesture. We have something to tell you, Nathan, he said. He and my mom had officially cut Brandon off. Completely. No more money, no more bailouts, no more covering his rent or his mistakes. He admitted they should have done it 20 years ago, but they had been too afraid he couldn't handle it. Watching you walk away that Christmas, my dad confessed, his voice rough, made us realize we had been protecting the wrong son. My mom added that Brandon hadn't taken it well. He'd called them every name imaginable, accused them of choosing me over him, threatened to never speak to them again. They let him. They decided that if he wanted to be part of their lives, it would have to be on his terms, as an adult, without expecting handouts. Last I heard, Brendan was still working at that warehouse, still living with a friend in a cramped apartment, still bitter, still blaming everyone but himself. Ashley had dumped him 8 months ago when the money ran out. He had tried reaching out to me once, about 3 months back, asking if I could loan him $5,000 for a new business venture. I didn't respond. Rebecca and I got married in April. A small ceremony, 50 people. My parents were there, sitting in the front row. My mom cried through the whole thing. My dad walked up to me afterward, his hand on my shoulder, and told me he was proud of me. It was the first time he had ever spoken those words to my face. Duke was the ring bearer, in his custom tuxedo. He stole the show. Rebecca still has about 200 photos of him from that day alone. The life we were building felt not just good, but deeply, truly right. But even with the peace and happiness, a question lingers: how do you truly heal from a past that took 30 years to acknowledge?